question. First of all, at subnational level, local governments have focused on the implementation of low-speed zones. That's very important to know. And after that, construction of bicycle infrastructure and public space and the implementation of public bicycle system. That's our first topic that we want to share. Second of all, some of the actions are to facilitate spaces, condition and initiatives for active mobility with a gender and differential approach. And finally, the strategy is a set of instruments, and we have 7 of those. The first one is governance, promotion and cultural transformation, territorial planning, infrastructure and mobility management, follow-up, information and monitoring, and regulation and finances.
Thank you, Vice Minister. So according to the IPCC report, we need to act faster and more decisively to meet the 2030 emission reduction targets. How do you think we can get governments to move at a better pace and in the right direction?
Okay, so first of all, it's essential that public designs tend to generate intergenerational and enjoyable meeting scenario for all people. Second, construction of cities. Very important that the search for funding sources that have an accessible infrastructure designed for the diversity of bodies and rhythms of people. Third of all, encourage pedestrian infrastructure and cycling infrastructure to incorporate UN Women Safe Cities principles. Fourth, ensure that women in their diversity can transit, ride bicycles at any time, free of violence, particularly by taking concrete action to eradicate sexual harassment, and thus increase their modal participation in these active modes. And finally, differentiate the variables in road safety for women. We have an agency that is called the ANCD, that is Agencia Nacional de Seguridad Vial, has a gender data analysis commitment in order to mainstream the gender approach in transformation around safety. So for us, it's very important what are we doing for women. So in conclusion, we can affirm that if we work with you, with our partners, in working for to give better ways to move for women, it's a very important way that we are reaching this subject.
Thank you, Vice Minister. Actually, yeah, the gender perspective of this national policy in Colombia is key to action. So please tell us, how do you support cities to deliver actions for active mobility? How to move from the national level to the local level with this national policy?
So we have three strategies. The first one is that we are co-financing of the transportation system in the main and intermediate cities. We are doing we finance the 70% of every transport that includes this kind of sensitive politicals, and implementation of a specific action in the territory, such as tactical urban planning, that's very important, and signaling at the high accident points, because we have to reach our main purpose of this government is that we have to save lives. This is very important for us, so we are trying to implement this specific action. And finally, technical assistance with GIC, that is very important for us to bring this important subject here, because with them we're working in technical teams and with the support of international cooperation from the portfolios of the Ministry of Housing, DMP, National Road Safety, and the programs that associate with the promotion of active mobility.
Thank you so much, Vice Minister, for sharing your experience. And as a Colombian NGO, this is a call to action, an invitation to continue supporting Colombian cities and in delivering for walking and cycling. So I'll hand it over to Sheila to introduce the next round. I hope it's on time. We were running like crazy, but
perfectly on time. We're learning as we go, but we're doing well. Thank you so much for that really interesting exchange, Patricia and Eduardo. I think the situation in Colombia has set the scene rather well for the wider discussion now of the sorts of challenges that we all face in getting our preferred modes, walking and cycling, firmly into national climate agendas. So if I could ask our next panel to come up and thank the Minister for your contribution.
Yeah.
as they can. I'm going to turn first to Bronwen Thornton. So Bronwen's walking behind me right now. So Bronwen is the CEO of Walk 21 and an international expert on walking and walkable communities, and amongst many other things, is chair of the Africa Network for Walking and Cycling. So earlier on, Patricia mentioned the PATH report in passing, and we ought to probably take some time to introduce PATH. PATH is the Partnership for Active Travel and Health, and it's an umbrella organisation over many of the groups who are here today, seeking to promote and advocate for these modes in the wider debate. So Bronwen, as a lead partner of the PATH initiative, could you share with us the latest work, the report that's just come out, and sort of help us understand how walking and cycling are showing up in this climate process that we're all here to take part in?
Great. Let me take that.
You just shake my hand. Strange, but
Great.
okay.
Thanks a lot, Sheila. So PATH is the Partnership for Active Travel and Health. As Sheila said, it's a loose coalition, and we formed after Glasgow, where, for those of you that will recall, there was a transport declaration, 2 pages of bullet points, no mention of walking, cycling or public transport until the very last draft, and we managed to get 1 bullet point in that included those modes into a transport vision for COP. This was a little call to action for our community that's interested in this topic, and so for last year's COP, we pulled together the core messages around the value for walking and cycling into a program, and we ran a letter that got more than 400 signatories calling for better provision, investment in walking and cycling as part of our climate solutions. And that process identified 5 key things, which are the sort of the framing core elements for the PATH coalition, which is the need for infrastructure, for campaigns, for land use planning, for integration with public transport, and for capacity building. So that was last year, and so then we had momentum, we had content, we had messages. So what do we do next? We look at where COP was up to. So this year we did our own global stocktake, and we looked at the national policies and the NDCs for all 197 UNFCCC countries. So for walking and cycling in both of those. And as you heard from Patricia about Colombia, it's actually only 8 countries that have both an NDC and a national policy for walking and cycling. So it's quite shocking that only 8 have got this coherent package, and I'm going to share with you some of the graphics about this in a minute. But what that means is that there are countries that have an NDC for walking or cycling and no national policy or no national framework by which to actually make that happen. Or they have a national policy and haven't reflected that in their NDC. And so those 8 countries, to give them their due in this forum, not just for Colombia, is Bangladesh, Bhutan, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Uganda, and Singapore. Now, I put Singapore out of alphabetical order because Singapore is the only high-income country in that list. Shame on the high-income countries. Shame on all the others as well, but not really. We're not here to name and shame. We're here to name and celebrate, and they're our 8 that we hold up. But there are many good things to learn from lots of the different countries. So let's see what the picture looks like for walking. And I've combined some graphic elements from the report, which you can get online at the PATH website. And what we can see here is a map of the countries and we've mapped whether they have a national walking policy, whether they have an NDC, whether they have both, or whether they have none. And you can see in the green, the 16% of countries both have an NDC and a national walking policy. Only 16% of countries. 73 have nothing documented yet for walking in either of these places. Now I want to ask a quick question. If we've got 41% of countries have a national walking policy, do we think cycling has more or less countries have got a national cycling policy? Just quickly. More?
Less.
More or less? More or less? They're all saying less. You must have read the report. Because it is less. And that surprised us. Because cycling has a more profile in many communities, in many situations, and a different voice and a different lobby framework. But there are less national policies. But what we see that's really interesting is that there's more investment and there's more evaluation of the work that's been done. But both these slides tell a story that there's more to do. And this slide in particular is really, really critical. We didn't just do the numbers. We didn't just do a quantitative analysis. We did that, you've just seen that, that's the numbers. But we looked at the content of all of the national policies as well. We developed a framework of key performance indicators, KPIs, and you can see them listed here. What's the status of the policy? What's the leadership, as in which department, which government agency is leading? Is it environment? Is it transport? Is it health? How long is the policy? What is the policy time frame for delivery? What is the ambition? What do they really actually state they want to achieve? And what's amazing in some of these policies is some of them want to see an increase in mode share for cycling or walking, or both, but not an increase in safety. They don't have safety ambitions inside their documents. We then have a look at what are the actual actions that have been documented, and then subsequently the investment and the evaluation, because we all know evaluation is so critical for making the case for further investment. We've been asking for it for years in our walking conferences that we have every year, and we're really delighted to see an increasing evaluation, but it's still, as you can see here, very low. So what this means is everyone can do and needs to do more. There's a lot to do, but we have a baseline from which we can measure that growth and measure that success as we go. We need more ambition, we need more action, and we need more money. We need more investment in these modes. But we're not just here to put a line on the page and say, do better. We're here to help. And part of the process with the National Climate Agenda is the review of NDCs coming up in 2025. So we've developed, based on a review of all of the policies and engagement with our expert group and the process, we've come up with a template NDC so that the NDCs, which are generally pretty patchy for walking and cycling at the moment, we've come up with a template that gives you a vision, it gives you some goals, and there's 20 actions. And I can tell you it was really hard to get it down to 20. You know, sometimes some people had 200 plus KPIs or actions for walking and cycling. So we've really tried to sharpen the pencil and make it as accessible and viable for people to deliver on these actions through their NDCs, national policies, and this critical relationship down to city level. And that's why today we're so pleased to have not only the Minister from Colombia, but the Mayor from Bogota, because it is this governance package working with NGOs and the community and everybody else that is going to be needed to deliver that, because national governments have a key role to play in enabling this work, but local governments are so critical for the actual delivery of it. Because not only do we deliver for climate, and this is my wrap up, we deliver on air pollution, we deliver on traffic congestion, we deliver on road safety, we increase public health, we increase the fairness of our societies, and we can create stronger economies with this investment. So last week or the week before now, we celebrated, 26th of November was the first World Sustainable Transport Day. Yeah.
The week before that.
Whoa. So we're here to help deliver on sustainable transport. We don't have sustainable transport if we don't have walking and cycling as part of that mix. And the ambition from us is that we can deliver reduce transport emissions by as much as 50%. But to achieve that, our ambition is 80% mode share for walking, cycling and public transport in our cities. And we look forward to working with national governments, with all the other agencies involved and with cities to deliver on that promise, because we need to. If you're serious about sustainable transport, we're serious about walking and cycling as well.
Thank you so much, Bronwen, for that. And I have two very quick things I would say. One is that the PATH initiative is walking and cycling, and you would be amazed that I think it's one of the very first things to bring the two together, and it's so powerful to have the best brains on the job, and I think that draft NDC shows that. And the database that lies behind the report is quite extraordinary. The detail the researchers went into is so impressive. I should say as well that we have some leaflets which have a QR code so that you can check out that report and download it. I really would encourage you to.
Can I make one more comment?
Go ahead.
There's a lot of detail, all the analysis of those 7 elements, those 7 KPIs. Every country, you can look into that. The assessment for each of those KPIs is in the report. And we're going to be making available all of the raw data so people can look up their individual countries in more detail as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Bron. So I kind of take from that, being positive, which is what you said at the beginning, that it's sort of some decent progress but could do better across the piece. So Jill Warren is here, and Jill is the CEO of the European Cyclists Federation, which advocates, of course, for more and better cycling around the world. I understand, Jill, the European Commission proposed in its EU declaration on cycling in October of this year some measures. Is that good enough, or could it do better too?
Okay. Well, thanks very much for that, Sheila. Delighted to talk about that because although as an NGO we very much like to concentrate on what more needs to be done and what hasn't been done yet, and let's do it now, I do think we need to pause and say that this has been a really momentous year for cycling in Europe. As Sheila mentioned, in Europe, the European Commission released its European Declaration on Cycling on the 4th of October, and this document is the most ambitious initiative ever released by the Commission regarding cycling. It elevates cycling to a strategic priority for the first time and acknowledges the vital role that cycling has to play in generating enormous benefits for society. So it's a comprehensive declaration. It's got 8 principles underpinned by 36 commitments, and these are designed to enable more and better cycling and to support the delivery of the EU's climate objectives and targets, of the European Green Deal and related policies. So these principles include developing and strengthening cycling policies, encouraging inclusive and affordable mobility, creating more and better cycling infrastructure, increasing investments and creating favorable conditions for cycling, improving road safety and security, supporting green jobs and the development of a world-class European cycling industry, supporting multimodality and cycling tourism, and last but not least, improving the collection of data on cycling. So this declaration delivers on a pledge that had been previously made by the former European Vice President, Frans Timmermans, until he left his post for the Dutch elections in August of this year. But he had been a friend of cycling throughout his mandate and did deliver on that. But I think that this declaration, which is proposed as an interinstitutional EU declaration, so the European Parliament and the member states are at this moment being invited to sign up to it, and we hope this happens within the next couple of months. But it has to be seen in the wider context. So earlier this year, in February, the European Parliament issued its own cycling resolution, which called on the EU to develop a cycling strategy, and it called on the EU to treat cycling as a fully fledged mode of transport. You wouldn't believe how controversial the notion of treating cycling as a fully fledged mode of transport is. That's one thing, for example, that language didn't make it into the Commission's declaration. I think it was considered, or what I heard is it was considered a little bit too radical. But there we go. We had about 90% of what we wanted to see in the declaration. Also in the same context are the EU member states that had their own European Cycling Declaration, an initiative started last year, led by Belgium, the Transport Minister Georges Gilquinet. That's been signed by 16 EU countries to date, also underpinning the broad support that there is amongst the member states for cycling. And then also in the wider European context, there's been the adoption by 54 countries of a pan-European master plan for cycling promotion, with ambitious plans for countries to create their own national cycling strategies if they haven't got them, and to harmonize the quality of cycling infrastructure in Europe. So our organization's been very closely involved with these developments, whether influencing the content with recommendations, and this is work that goes back many years. Also just providing the evidence that makes that strong case for the benefits cycling can bring, participating in consultations, and really, holding their feet to the fire on we need this, we need it now. So we're very, very pleased that this has come, and I think in terms of what we hope for, we hope that this will really help unleash the potential that cycling has to a wider degree in Europe, that it supports much greater investment in cycling across the continent, and that ultimately it will enable more people to cycle more often and more safely and deliver all those adjacent benefits that we know cycling can deliver. So that's just a picture of one part of the world and what's going on with cycling.
Thank you very much indeed, Jill, for that overview. So we're hearing already that there are lots of different master plans in place. We have with us today Heather Thompson, who's CEO of the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, better known as ITDP, and actually easier known as ITDP because I can never get all those words right. It's great to have you here, Heather. Your work is so very focused on supporting governments and cities as they develop their sustainable mobility strategies, and I know that you've just celebrated an exciting anniversary of Cycling Cities, one of your big initiatives, which we're proud to be part of. Cycling clearly is a good climate solution. It's a bit of a no-brainer, but the strategies may be coming into place, but the resources aren't. So how do we get more resources into cycling and walking, actually?
Well, thank you, and it's great to be with partners to bring together walking and cycling, because they certainly are so related and really need to work hand in hand. But I'm going to focus more specifically on cycling. So coming out of the pandemic, we saw in the pandemic an opportunity where so many people went to the streets and were walking and cycling more than they ever had been before. Cars stopped running and people had the space to really walk and cycle, which we wish that they had every day. And so at ITDP, we saw all of that momentum around the world, and we decided that we really wanted to take advantage of that. So we began our campaign, the Cycling Cities campaign. And our real goal was to show that there is demand from cities all over the world for cycling, particularly in the global south. We hear a lot about cities, often leadership cities in Europe, Copenhagen, the Netherlands, Paris, but we don't hear enough about wonderful cities like Bogota and Colombia and the things that so many cities around the world want to do. We know that most people today actually walk or cycle to get from their homes to their jobs, but often under unsafe circumstances. So we really wanted to elevate this with our campaign. We now have about 40 cities that have joined the campaign, predominantly from the global south. We have about 50 partners and close to 700 people representing cities from all over the world have signed the pledge. And based on that, again, the idea is to show that there is demand for more investment in cycling. And what that really comes down to, the most kind of key success factor for successful cycling in a city is to create infrastructure where there are protected lanes. People can actually cycle safely. So our goal was to have 25 million more people located near protected lanes by 2025. And we realized that one of the things that we really needed to do was unlock investment in cycling lanes. So protected lanes are the most cost-effective, quick-win climate solution. As Jill said, it's kind of crazy how often cycling is not thought of as a real climate solution when it is so affordable, so cost-effective, and so fast to implement. We did some analysis with the support from the FIA Foundation to really look at what the greenhouse gas savings, what the climate benefits can come from protected lanes. Outside of Europe, there had been no analysis that had been done. So Bogota and the city of Guangzhou in China were two of our case studies. We also created a model that is open source, available online for any city to use to calculate your own savings. That model has been used to calculate savings for cities like Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. What we found is that it's the most affordable, least expensive solution, that it takes about $3 for every 100 kilometers, which is pennies. And the same infrastructure for cars is about 6 times more expensive. With $10 million, you can serve about 1,000 people compared to $1.5 billion that it takes for the same infrastructure for cars. In terms of health savings, which is one of the biggest benefits from air quality, which we currently spend 3.3% of our global GDP on. So health savings are one of the biggest savings. And then in terms of greenhouse gases alone, if we think about a 13% increase in cycling, which is a very reasonable estimate, we already heard that the modal share in Bogota is 30%, so 13% increase around the world by 2050 would save us 2 gigatons of CO2e a year. And that's about the equivalent of $800 billion, or the equivalent of planting 400,000 trees every year. So these are huge numbers that are often overlooked. With that, cycling lanes pay for themselves in a year. Bogota, as an example, the cost of their infrastructure has been about $132 million a year, but that saves them $80 million a year. So it's already, again, pays for itself. That saves 300 deaths, avoids 300 deaths a year, and saves 22,000 1,000 pounds of CO2 gases. So again, these are really large numbers. So based on that whole idea that we really can have such huge greenhouse gas savings, we wanted to look at making the case for return on investment. In many global south cities, they really depend on blending capital from national city sources as well as finance from multilateral development banks. And so we looked at examples from around the world where this blended financing has happened, and have just about to release a study, which there should be a QR code being shown behind me in a minute. We released a study that we've done in partnership with the World Bank, where we looked at 5 case studies where there has been MDB investment that has led to scaled investment in cycling infrastructure. But what we found is that in each case there's been a different entry point. And the whole idea that we need to move towards is standardizing these approaches and streamlining these approaches at the banks so that they become common practice. Again, we know that there's demand, we know that there's benefits, we know that they're fast to implement and cost effective, but we need to standardize the approach and streamline the approach. We looked at Buenos Aires, Tianjin, Lima, Addis Ababa, and Dar es Salaam, each having different entry points, and I'll allow Nicolas Peltier from the World Bank to share more about those case studies. And our real goal in a next phase of work is to, again, create a return on investment tool that streamlines these approaches so that they can be copied, and to make that tool available to other banks to utilize as well. So I'll let Nicolas share more on the next panel.
Thank you so much, Heather, for that. And the point at which you end is the absolutely perfect point to move on to our finalist, the final panelist, Stephen O'Driscoll, who is head of the European Investment Bank's Environmental, Climate and Social Office. And I know that you lead, amongst other things, the bank's Climate Bank Roadmap. So many titles batting around. It's going to be, by the end of the week, we're going to be dizzy with these things. So finance is your gig. It's your thing. So it would be great to know what the EIB is doing through that roadmap, and what other lending policies you have in place or are planning to support these no-brainer modes of mobility. So over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Sheila. It is our gig and we love it, and we're here to support, so please do come and speak to us. Let me just first start by commending you, Sheila, and other people on the panel and everyone else in the audience, I'm sure, who's doing so much to promote active mobility. It's very impressive, and Bronwen, that piece of analysis work across 197 countries, I don't know how you stuck with that. That must have been a real achievement. No, I'm really happy to be here today because what you're doing is very much aligned with what we're trying to do as the EU Climate and Environment Bank. And we have a series of commitments around that, and the CBR is the vehicle through which we're trying to operationalise those commitments. And just very quickly, those commitments are, well, it started with the energy lending policy in 2019, which said that we wouldn't anymore finance unabated fossil fuel projects. Sorry, it's my colleague in the room, but we were the first to do that as an MDB, which was very good. We also, and then we kind of followed that up with a series of new commitments, the first of which was that we would try and achieve at least 50% of our financing, which would be considered to be making a substantial contribution to climate action, environmental sustainability objectives. And in EU taxonomy terms, that means achieving certain thresholds for substantial contribution. So that was a good framework around which to work. We also said that we would support $1 trillion in investment during the critical decade, out to 2030. And then the last one was that we would make sure that all of our investments are Paris aligned by the end of 21, as it was at the time. So we made this commitment in 2020. And just on those commitments, we've already exceeded the 50%. We were at 58% in 2023, and 58% of 65 billion as an annual lending volume is a very substantial amount of money. We're on track for the trillion as well, 2 years in. And on Paris alignment, we set out a very clear framework which laid out exactly what we could and couldn't support as being consistent with a low carbon pathway and a climate resilient pathway. And if you look at that, Annex 2 of the CBR, by the way, the very first item in there is that we can support active mobility. So we're on to this, and we're here to help. Some of the other policy documents that we have as well, we have our transport lending policy. And in there, under the urban mobility piece, we show how we're going to try and support active mobility and collective active mobility as well. So we definitely see this as part of developing sustainable urban transport infrastructure. And what tends to happen is that because the investments are quite small, typically, and we are historically a bank that likes to finance quite big projects, what we try and do is bundle them up and try and put them in sustainable urban framework loans as well. So that we can actually get down to the kind of granular level where many of these investments actually appear. They're usually bundled together, and I can think of one which is the BRT project in Senegal, where we're very active in the dialogue up front with the promoter in making sure that they actually include cycling infrastructure in the development at the time. And the other way we're active in this space is through the European Commission and EIB co-financed free of charge advisory service, which is called JASPERS, which provides advisory services to project promoters and local authorities in most EU member states and Eastern European member states. And there, the advisory services to try and help them come up with strategies and programs and projects to make EU-funded investments green and sustainable. So JASPERS, as a partnership with the Commission, supports cities and regions in the preparation of sustainable urban mobility plans. That's key for us. And cycling and walking are obviously an important part of that. And obviously the intention is to reduce congestion, cut emissions, and generally make the world we live in a much more pleasurable place to be. Some of the specific walking, cycling advisory work we've done have been in countries like Greece and Slovakia, recently in Cyprus and southern Italy. And maybe just to finish, JASPERS, so that the co-advisory service would also be doing some specific sump training in European cities during the course of 2024. And in that, one of the dedicated training modules is actually on active mobility, walking and cycling. So we really are onto this, and we're here to help. And this is our mandate as the EU climate plan. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for that. And it's great to hear that you're onto it. That's what we want. And that you're matching actually finance with advice too. I think that's really important. So it's not in any sense tokenistic. It's very well developed. We have just minutes left on this panel. So as I'm a great believer that we all need to go around these big do's sharing messages, I'm going to give you each a minute to just tell me what is the one thing you would say to UNFCCC negotiators if you bumped into one in relation to these modes. Bron, you go first.
On the spot with an unexpected question.
One thing, come on, that's what you're here for. One thing if you had a minute in front of them.
There's value in walking and cycling. It makes a difference, and it must be part of the NDC framework that we expect in 2025.
Jill, by the time it gets to Stephen, they'll all have gone. It's not fair.
Yeah. It's the walking and cycling, the quickest, fastest, most affordable way to decarbonize transport. Do it now.
Heather?
All that they said.
All
But
of the above.
also just there's such a focus on electrification and technology, and we absolutely need that. But it's expensive, it takes time, and meanwhile we have these simple solutions that are affordable and equitable for everyone. We need to find a way to elevate them, to make the investment, find the entry points, whether it's health, congestion alleviation, or climate change benefits, and make the investment happen at scale.
I'm really scratching around that.
Stephen, I'm so sorry.
No,
That was a bit
I
unfair.
would say to them pretty much as the other panelists have said, be open-minded on that active mobility is part of the solution. It's absolutely part of the solution. And there is interest out there in financing these projects. So just think a bit laterally and we can get this done.
I think that's a really important final point though, because all too often we're told the money's not there for these solutions, but you're saying it's coming, and it is. So that is absolutely brilliant. Thank you. A real high to end on. So we've got our messages. Let's not forget those as we walk around and move around this side. So I have to say a big thank you to you all. I'm sorry it's so short. There's never enough time to do justice to the detail. But I think our next panel will be able to continue to think about this issue of finance and look at it from, I think, a more specific perspective, which is cities. So thank you to all of you. And if I could ask the next panel to come up, that would be great. And while our panel is joining us and touching on the issue of cities, of course we know that's something that's being considered a lot at the moment in the Bloomberg C40 Local Climate Summit. Please, Nicolas, take a seat, which is also being held here in Dubai. And we're very lucky to be able to have two mayors with us today who have been part of that summit. Oh, we don't have them. Where are our mayors? Sorry, Claudia, would you like to join us? I apologise. I should have invited you specifically. Thank you. So yes, as I say, we have two mayors joining us. We have Claudia right now, and we hope we'll be joined by Sharon Dijksma of Utrecht any moment. So if I may turn to you first, Claudia. I have to note you're Bogota's first ever female mayor, so I know it's a little while back you were elected, but congratulations on that. I don't think we can say congratulations enough when women break through in that way. I know you have got a huge focus in the work you do on the issues of inclusivity and environmental protection in the city. And so I just wondered if you could share with us a little about the specific goals and measures that are included in your plans, your mobility plans. I think your sustainable and safe mobility plan specifically to try and improve and promote walkability and cycling for everyone to get that inclusivity in. So I think we'd love to hear a bit more about that.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. Well, Bogota is a large city, it's a 9 million people city, it's actually a city region of 10 million people. We are proud to be the biking capital of the world. And this has been this is a Colombian tradition actually, you know. Biking in Colombia, and as you know, the escarabajos are well known in sports worldwide. So this is part of our culture, I have to say, and that's something that has allowed us to promote the use of biking. But the tradition of actually not using bikes or biking, but actually redistributing public space for walking and biking, particularly for biking, is something that is the next couple of years will be 50 years of tradition, in which we close every Sunday some parts of the cities, of the avenues that we currently use for cars, exclusively for pedestrians and bike users. That's called the Ciclovia. We started like with 10 kilometers, and nowadays, 50 years after, we close every Sunday around 120 kilometers. Currently, I mean, in an average Sunday, 1.5 million people come to the Ciclovia every Sunday. In a very successful Sunday, probably 2.5 million people come to walk and bike in the city. And so that's a great tradition. And the second, like 30 years ago, we started moving towards the Sunday Ciclovia into the dedicated, protected bike lanes. And 30 years ago we started something sort of close to the some of the environmental areas and parks, something more related to recreation and tourism rather than to mobility itself. But then, I will say in the last 20 years, we decided to promote and use and reserve public space for biking as a mode of transportation. And I'm amazed. It's 2023, and we still cannot say that biking is a mode of transportation? Come on. Come on. That's absurd. Of course it's a mode of transportation. It is. It is by far. It is by fact. The point is, it will be a safe, protected mode of transportation or not. It's not if it is a mode of transportation or not. It is if it has the proper infrastructure, the proper signals, the proper policy, the proper investment to do it. But this is the part of the successful story of Bogota, which is biking. Currently, we have almost 600 kilometers of dedicated, protected bike lanes in Bogota. During the pandemic, we had the opportunity to put in place 87 kilometers in a month, during the pandemic. And in 2020, everybody says, oh, well, that's great. Bogota is always leading the process. That's fantastic.
Hi.
So glad to see you. So glad to see you.
Sorry I'm late.
Don't worry, we just started. So 87 kilometers. But then in 2021, when the normal life came in, meaning the car life came in, the polluted car came in again, and say, oh, no, let's take away those cycleways. We don't need it anymore. That was just for the emergency and the crisis. And I said, no, not at all. We're going to measure how much traffic it causes, how much travels per day they are doing. And we decided to keep half of them permanently. And it was like I conquered the moon, you know. I mean, conquered the 7th Avenue in Bogota. It's like conquering Broadway or the 5th Avenue in New York. You know, once you take a space for decarbonized alternative mode of transportation, you never ever surrender that space. That will be my first advice as mayor. It's so hard to conquer a centimeter. Once you conquer, you never ever give it away. So we measured, this was not a political decision only, but also we measured the indicators, and we came to the conclusion that at least half of them could be permanent. And we decided to add that. So at the moment, we have like 610 kilometers. We issue a policy both for pedestrians and for biking in the city in itself. And then we issued just 2 weeks ago the long-term sustainable secure mobility plan for the next 10 years. And all that is part of the land use master urban development plan, which is going to be in place at least for 12 years until 2035. So it's not only a mobility plan, it's that mobility plan, the pedestrian and the biking policy are part of the mobility plan, and the mobility plan is part of the land use master development plan. It means it's long term, it's not only short term. It's 41 billion pesos will be dedicated to these policies, and 2 billion of that will be for biking, 4 billion of that will be for pedestrians. Why? Because that's the other side of the coin. We are very successful in biking, but we are ashamed for pedestrians. That's the whole truth. I mean, pedestrians are the ones that we owe the most. They have the largest part, 1 out of 4, at least. 1 out of 4, it could be, depending on how you measure, it could be 1/3. But at least 1 of 4 travels per day in Bogota are done by pedestrians. So it's the 50% by public transportation, roughly 11% by biking, right? So as you could guess by simple math, less than 20% of Colombians own a car. Less than 15 to 20% of travels per day are done by cars. But if you compare that to actual space distribution, right?
Yeah.
Cars are less than 20% of the travel, but they own and use and occupy sort of 80% of the space. So redistributing public space accordingly to income, accordingly to reducing emissions, according to public health policy, according to road safety policy, it should be absolutely the other way around, right? So we decided to, and Nicolas probably knows this, to enforce and to push for this concept of the green corridor, as opposed to the avenue concept of the 20th century. So the 20th century king was the car. Every city in the world was arranged, organized, planned, built around the avenues for car users. They were the kings of the space and the modes of transportation. The green corridor of the 21st century should be the other way around. First of all, nature. Water, ecosystem design, sustainable design. That's the first criteria to public space distribution. That should be. The second is pedestrians. You are the largest, the safest. Are we going to have a discussion if our legs and foot are modes of transportation? Really? Of course, we pedestrians, we are a mode of transportation. The same way that biking is a mode of transportation, it shouldn't make any difference in the discussion. So first nature, then pedestrians, then bike users or other modes of alternative transport, then public transport, clean public transport, decarbonized public transport, and then everybody else. That should be the way we distribute public space. That's the whole concept of green corridor. So we were lucky enough, I have to finish with this, we were lucky enough, we have a lot of pains because of the pandemic, but also we have the opportunity. It would have been incredibly hard, politically and practically, to set up 87 new kilometers of cycleways, dedicated, protected lanes in normal times. We were able to do it because of the pandemic, and we never surrendered. So we were lucky enough. Second, we were lucky enough that within my term, 3 different instruments, we had the opportunity to issue 3 different instruments. First of all, our climate action plan. Second of all, our land use master development plan. And third, the mobility plan. So I could manage to do it in the same term, 4-year term. And so they are coherent and cohesive in terms of objectives and goals and investments in the long term. So that's also, I took advantage of that opportunity. And third, we're building now. Unfortunately, Bogota, which is incredibly in biking, is also very good in innovative, pioneering innovative solutions for mobility. That's why we won twice, along with Paris, which we are very proud of. Only Paris and Bogota have won twice the mobility award of ITDP. And that's for a good reason, right? It's because of innovation. But then we started innovating very well, I was saying more than 45 years ago, the Ciclovia. Then at the beginning of the 2000s, at the end of the 1990s, we created the largest BRT at the time in the world, which is Transmilenio, which was a great innovation. And then we unfortunately have like 10 to 15 years in which political discussion came in and destroyed everything, We didn't improve Transmilenio, we didn't build the first metro line, we didn't really increase the cycleway network. we were trapped in a political discussion, very ideological, very polarized. So in 10 years, we built only 5 kilometers of public transportation. 5 in an 8 million people city. Nothing. So what happens is that the motor came in and took over, you know. In the meantime of all this political discussion, no building, no constructor, nothing, then the motor increased as a mode of transportation in the city, which is the worst thing that could happen to us in all senses. Motorcycles, in terms of road safety, are the worst, both as victims and as casualties. They pollute anyway as cars. They are, you know, individual solutions rather than collective public solutions. So it's not the best way. So we pay a huge price for it. And we were lucky enough to, again, after the pandemic, we have this huge economic and social crisis because we lost more than 1 million jobs. Poverty doubled after the pandemic. So we decided to do this sort of, I call it like the social green Keynesianism of the 21st century, like using private investment and public investment to put up a large public works investment in the city to upgrade, to improve, and to build the infrastructure for the next 10 years. So I paid a political price for it. You know, if you come to Bogota, you're all very welcome, but you will see that the city is under public works and under public construction everywhere. We have 1,000 public works going on at the moment. But to make a long story short, we came up in the next decade, from 2022 to 2032. I myself, during my term, and the previous administration together, we're leaving the city with 207 kilometers of new public transportation and infrastructure for mobility in a decade. So from 5 kilometers to 2007. That's a huge difference. It's composed of 2 metro lines, 1 regional train, all electric, 3 cables, because Bogota is surrounded by beautiful mountains, but those are popular neighborhoods that need to connect to the metro. So those are electric cables. We are building 231 new kilometers of cycleways in that decade. Yeah. And most importantly, we're improving by far the pedestrian space in all corridors. Green corridors are this new pyramid of now they are mandatory, and we're going to build in the next 10 years at least 22 green corridors in the city. So that's sort of the transformation, but it requires not really money. Of course, money and funding is important, but it's political decision. Yeah. You know, the pressure that I guess from cars, from privileged people, from privileged interests, who account less than 20% of the travel, that they want to keep the 80% of the space. They want to keep it. They don't want to concede a centimeter. So this requires social movements working on. This requires political clout and decision. And this requires building. Because once people have it, they use it and they love it. The debate and the discussion is previous to the construction. Once you do it, nobody want to come back to the past.
It's about empowering people who are
It's about empowering people and showing people this is equity, this is social justice, this is SDGs, and these are climate action goals at the same time. That's the experience of both.
That is amazing, kind of whiz through what has been a real transformation in the city. I mean, I think your combination of using the cultural attitude towards cycling and turning it into proven mode, and then taking advantage of COVID as something which had few silver linings, but you clearly have gone where there were some, is really quite inspirational. And I know, moving on to Sharon Dijksma, who's joined us, and thank you for joining us. I know how busy you are at the moment, dashing around. I know you're the special envoy for ICLE on cities, talking about cities in this COP process, so you're very, very well placed to talk about these issues. And Utrecht, your city, is a great leader when it comes to walking and cycling. We've had an extraordinary exposition of how the change that has been achieved in Bogota has come about. Would you be happy to share with us what's been happening in Utrecht and where you think it's going? And it would be super interesting to know some of the problems, some of the issues you've overcome in a quite different setting to Bogota.
Yes, but I think that at the same time our problems are the same. Although it's a whole different continent and maybe even a whole different culture. What we have seen is that making the pedestrians and the cyclists the kings of the road is really asking for a long-term policy and a consequent policy. It needs public support. I think we need to talk about this because for my city it was not that difficult because we are not only a very ancient city with already 900 years city rights, but at the same time the youngest city in the Netherlands with many people who are having high education, so they vote very progressive, and that gives us as a city council an enormous mandate, and the issue is to use it wisely actually. So what we try to do is to change the pattern, and that means that all starts by how do you go to your school, are you brought by car or do you bike yourself or you walk? Preferably the last. I think, as Claudia mentioned, for us it is the same. I think the cyclists are the great champions in Utrecht nowadays. You have to look everywhere behind you. You have to have eyes in your back actually when you bike in my city. I was once with our colleague from California, London Breed, from LA, from San Francisco. I was biking around in the Netherlands and I asked the American delegation, can you bike? They could, but that was a whole different ball game than biking in Utrecht. So these were the 20 most anxious moments actually in the life of me as a mayor, because I thought about the diplomatic issue that would come up when London would fall down maybe, or one of her delegation, because there were bikes everywhere around us, and I'm used to this, but they obviously weren't. So yes, it can be done. You need to have a plan. That is, I think, correct, and it is not one plan but integrated policy. So that would be my first advice. So not only the people who think about public space, but also those who are working on mobility, those who are working on housing, those who are working on maybe even social programs should be all at the same ballgame. And the SDGs for our city are like a Bible. So we use this as a way of making our plans, and they need to be in it. So integrated plans are one thing. Second thing, which I think is important, is that you sometimes have to be a little bit stubborn and just do it. Because yes, there will be people who are against the plan, there will be opposition. In my city it was not that fierce, but there is. And if you show people what happens if the cars are no longer ruling the roads, but the others do, then they immediately understand by seeing things how it is important also to them. Because they are less vulnerable when they move along in the city. There is more space for children to play. The clean air health is an issue, so we try to also get in other arguments than climate policy, why it benefits people, and bring it closely to their heart. So your health is something which is really important to you. Your economical situation is important to you. So we try to make this agenda also a very just agenda. So if we, for instance, have the culture of being on a bike, we see that in even a rich city as Utrecht, there are groups of people, most of the times children from migrants, who are not able to afford a bike. So we provide them. in programs. So these kinds of things we are doing to encourage everybody to make a different choice every day. And we have this culture where it's totally normal to be in your suit and take your bike. I also even wear high heels biking around to the city office. That's normal. And that is what the change is, and it is not by one night, it doesn't happen by night, it happens by decades actually, and therefore you need a persistent city council, city government who is aiming all the time, have your eyes on the ball and focus on what you really want to achieve. Now, what did we do? Then I finish. We had some really nice examples on how we made the change in Utrecht still nowadays. All these bikes, we need to stall them somewhere. We have even more bikes per inhabitant, more than one, right? So this is a city of almost 400,000 inhabitants. So we maybe have like 600 or 800,000 bikes. And they need to be stalled. So we do this under the ground. And then we ended up with having the biggest parking plot for a garage actually just below the city central station, and it has 12,000 spaces, and it's always full. And everybody uses it, and the first few hours it's free, you pay just only a little account, it's guarded, so it's not, most of the times your bikes are not stolen, so it has a lot of advantages. So we try to tempt people also to make the right choice. And one other big example is actually came from a referendum. We had a 8 or 9 path high road in the heart of the city. And in the old days it used to be like a medieval canal. And by referendum it was decided that we would get rid of the high road and build back the canal. So now it happened, and we have like a 5-kilometer canal in the heart of our city where young people are on subs, where you could lay in the grass, and when it's even sometimes in the Netherlands the sun is shining. So then you could go there. It's public space, so you do not have to ask anyone to go and lay down and put your cloth and maybe even have a little swim. So this is actually how it affects also the lives of the people in a good way. And I think that is the best agenda. If you have the perfect examples, like little diamonds of projects in where you can convince people, they can really actually see what the change will be, then you can convince them more easy. And I think that is for all climate activists the biggest challenge. Also in my own country, where it is a rough time at the moment on national level, with a national right-wing party being very big, that we can only win the hearts and minds of the people when we really are able to convince them. And we need to find arguments which are close to their heart. And that is something that not always has to do actually immediately with only the climate agenda. So if you say the icebergs are melting, my daughter is in fear, my neighbor not. If you say this pollution will kill your child maybe 5 years earlier than you would like to, then the neighbor is worried. So think about these things. That would be my message.
Thank you so much. I think the power of showing by doing is crucial, and it's in some ways one of the few tools we've got, but it's one of the most powerful. And I think everything you've said about inclusivity is so important. Both of you touched on that, because I think one of the aspects of vehicles that we don't talk about enough is how very inclusive they are. They are increasingly huge, increasingly expensive. They are a trap in terms of finance for many people. We published a report just last week through the foundation which identified that vehicles, SUVs, they dominate the fleet. They're bigger than they've ever been, 1.5 tons on average. They're dangerous. Yeah. They take up all the road space. You couldn't park 1,200 of them underground in one space, that's for sure. And they're trapping people into financial situations which, for the poorest in communities, are dangerous. They're virtually subprime. And when you know, and PATH has done great work on this, and I know others have, that up to 80% of urban journeys could be done walking or cycling. You don't need a vehicle, let alone a giant ex-military one. It's an issue of equity that we promote this mode too, I think. So thank you so much for both of your very inspirational contributions. There is a question I want to ask you, but I also want to come to Nicolas first. So Nicolas, we heard, Nicolas Peltier, sorry, I should introduce you properly, from the World Bank. We heard from Heather earlier about the climate benefits of active modes, and I know you have a very long career securing investments in transport all around the world, including here in the Middle East. And we heard from the EIB earlier that they're onto this idea of investment and finance in safe cycling infrastructure, which was touched on there by Claudia. So how do we get the rest of the NDBs on board with this agenda? Can you tell us what your cunning plan to get finance into these modes is, please?
Yeah, thank you, Sheila. And I want to start by saying it's always inspiring to listen to mayors, no? Because you understand that pushing sustainable solutions for mobility requires a vision, and it requires leadership. No? And through your experience, we can really see that. Bogota has been a laboratory. We've learned so much from it. We learned in public transportation, the Transmilenio, the metro, the cable car. We learned on your biking pedestrian plans. We learned also on some of your policies that you didn't mention, but you tried to introduce a congestion charge, no? Which was also a very bold, move. No? Being a big fan of the Tour de France, I can also confirm what you said about the Colombian biking spirit. No? So to come to the organization I represent, the World Bank. I mean, the idea of biking is and financing biking lanes is not new, no? And in fact, we've been doing that for quite some time. And I want to mention one example that is almost a decade old, which is from China, the city of Tianjin. And it's a really, really interesting program that we started in the years 2015 through the financing of $100 million that was matched by 50 million from the city. It's interesting because the whole conversation didn't start with biking. No? What happened is that the city authorities came to the World Bank and other development partners and said, we just completed a metro and we want to get the most out of it. No? And so then the conversation was, how do you increase ridership? How you build a system around your mass transit investment so that you maximize the benefits? And we had to get into urban planning. We had to get into land management. You have to get into street scaping. You had to get into traffic management. No? And so that triggered a really interesting conversation from that metro investment. And when we did the evaluation last year, actually, when we completed this program, what was interesting is the fact that we had a triple win. No? We had a win from a perspective of transport users, so more effective, faster transportation. We had a win from a social perspective, an environmental perspective, a health perspective, and we have also an economic rationale, no? The increased ridership and the increased profitability of the metro system. No? So I think these are the story that we need to tell more, because they are the type of example that can bring these solutions to scale and accelerate the dissemination of backing programs. No? So this is why with ITDP, and Heather mentioned the study that we concluded, and we just released report at the occasion of this COP. So I leave some leaflets also with a QR code so that you can download it. But we try to take stock of all these examples from Dar es Salaam, from Addis Abeba, from Lima. We don't do Bogota because it's already so well known, but it will be in the subsequent phases. We try to reduce the transaction cost for future investments. No? So that when we get to engage with a particular city who is interested in developing biking, there is a roadmap that is a toolbox that is already ready to be used. No? That we have models to evaluate the economic benefits, so that we can really quickly move into implementation. I think, Heather, you mentioned that we really saw after COVID this acceleration of this change in behaviors and really a big momentum for biking. It's there to stay. What was really interesting is that we did some subsequent research because there was some concern, there was a surge during COVID, but then maybe people will go back to the older habits. They didn't, no? So that these mobility behavior changes are there to stay. We clearly see that momentum in the countries and the cities we are working with. I think this is a solution that makes particular sense for developing countries because the land use policies are a little bit less cast in stone than what they are in developed nations. So that opens also a lot of opportunities to accelerate this agenda. So at the World Bank right now we have about I think a dozen of cities with whom we are working to implement those biking programs. I hope that very soon we'll hit the 1,000 kilometers of bike lanes that we financed, and we want to go bigger than that. No? So an event like this one I think helped to spread, and we need more voices like
1,000?
1,000, yes. And we want to do more.
What about 1 million?
Well, that should be the ambition. Yes.
That's called a lesson in ambition, Nicolas.
Shoot for the moon.
Come on, you're the World Bank.
Yeah, you're the World Bank, exactly. Keep going, Nicolas, soldier on.
We're all behind you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, Nicolas. Well, your moderator didn't stop you. It was your co-panel.
That's like one subway.
Thank you.
One subway for 1 million kilometers of cycle lanes. It's the trade-off pretty for the World Bank.
No, but on this, what I think is interesting is coming back to this experience of Tianjin, because we see an evolution in the type of biking programs. No, initially it was a bit of a side component of mass transit investment. So cities were coming to see us. We have this urban rail, we have this metro, we have this BRT. What can we do? And we design those biking activities. Now it's different. No, we have cities coming to see us with the biking agenda that is the entry point. No? And we see more and more mayors who see this as an opportunity to transform their cities, to make it more lively. I can mention one example, which is the city of Lima, where we have a program that will be very soon completed. And the conversation there was immediately into developing biking programs through a programmatic approach. And it was combined with a traffic management conversation. No? And coming back a little bit to what you mentioned earlier about these difficulties about the social tension with car users. In the case of Lima, traffic management was a constraint. It's a city that is disproportionately congested compared to the level of cars. Now, and part of that is just because traffic light system, traffic management is not optimized. So we work with Lima on trying to improve this traffic management, and that can smooth the conversation with the traffic users. No? And because then the question is, what do we do with the space that is saved, and why don't we use it for bike lanes? So these are the new generation of biking programs that we start to see, and I think we'll see more in the future.
Thank you, Nicolas. Thank you so much. And it's great to hear the bank is taking this on, and I know you have a long track record of working in this area, and I think having models and good practice, that's invaluable at city level. And I'm just curious if I may go back to our two mayors for some advice, really. So I know, Claudia, your advice was never give the space back. Brilliant advice. We should fight for every inch we ever gain. And Sharon, I know your point, I think you made really powerfully, was, you know, good examples can really sing out. And don't ever kill a delegation of Americans. That's a really good piece of advice. But I'm just wondering, what political advice would you give to mayors? So almost aside from these realities of finance and so on, we're seeing a cultural war really around vehicle ownership and walking and cycling. I'm a proud London liver. I live in London. Super proud of the work that's going on there. But it's tough. It's politically tough. Have you any thoughts, words of advice you would give to your other mayors, particularly here? They're all here. Many of them are here. You know, from your own experience.
Well, I think that you have to work close with your government because you're not alone. You have your aldermen, and they also do huge parts of the job. So to come into a situation where you align with them and push the limit, I think that is really important. Secondly, there is always this discussion about money. And what I have seen that even in a country as the Netherlands, it was quite difficult for cities to have access to funding in order to really work along the SDGs. So we organized ourselves, and as a head of the Association of Dutch Municipalities, I fought actually a political fight, obviously, with our government on funding, because that makes your life also a little bit Okay, thank you.
It's okay, the moderator's in control, don't worry. Please
Okay.
keep going, Sharon.
I thought a voice from above.
It did sound like
It's the minister. No, so I think that is very important, because you really need to make the difference, and it's not for free, especially when you need quality. And that is something that, thirdly, I also think it's very important. Let the change be the best you could offer. So you need actually access to funding, and I think that is why I'm also here, because I see that the United Nations is the United Nations of the people. But many times in many of our countries, the national governments do not represent all the time the citizens. So here we as mayors step in, and we need to be much more in the fast forward of claiming also our own role at the negotiation table, whether it's international or national. And that is, I think, why I was also asked by ICLAI to do so, because I have been a minister. I have been at the other part of the table, so to say, and I know actually what it takes to do this, but I'm convinced that it is necessary, because I have seen that only when I collaborated together with cities on the issues where I had responsibility, that I was really successful, because most of the times it's not happening on the national level. Those roads or those places for pedestrians, or the battle for public space is fought in the cities. There we can win or lose, as Guterres said, the whole fight for the rights for the people when it comes to climate change. And if there is no, so it all starts, I think, also by acceptance and also understanding by our colleagues that they could be the game changer.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Claudia, just a few words. We have little time. Sorry.
So I will put it this way. If we all want to achieve the climate change goals, but we also want to achieve the SDGs, And the perfect intersection of those both is decarbonized mobility. That's the perfect intersection of both goals, the most important goals, global goals for humanity at this time. So Nicolas, you are at the heart. Because that's really clean, decarbonized, multimodal transportation. It's about inclusivity, it's about public health, right? It's about road safety, it's about equity, right? And it's about productivity also, and of course sustainability, of course. So decarbonized mobility is at the heart, it's at the intersection between the SDGs and the climate change goals. If we want to choose, this is the sector in which we can have more impact, more scalable, more replicable around the world. So let's focus on that.
Yeah.
Second of all, is multimodal transportation. It's not coming with biking plans or pedestrian plans or the subway, right? It's multimodal transportation. Pedestrians and biking and buses and metros and cables and mixed-use lanes. It's ands, not ors. So we need multimodal plans, comprehensive as we want to. The third, maybe both Sharon and me mentioned it, is at the city level, land use plans should be mobility plans too. They work together, they bring feedback. So they have to be integrated. You know, it's not to have a pedestrian policy or a walking policy or a biking policy, and then the housing and the urban and the mobility plans, you know, separated. No, it has to be a comprehensive climate action plan, land use plan, and mobility plan. They come together. And the third is about money. So let's put money, you know, on the hands of those who can make the difference. Quicker, more effectively, with more legitimacy, which are subnational governments, you know. Land use plans, urban development plans, or mobility plans are not done by national levels, although they do policy level, which is at the national level. But the actual investment, the actual building, the actual construction, the actual operation of the whole thing is at the city level. So we need, Nicolas, I beg you, the World Bank, the ITDP, the CAF, please set up the rules, set up the criteria so that Utrecht or Bogota or any city in the world can apply directly with climate change mobility SDG plans directly to the World Bank, without all the red tape and bureaucratic procedures of the national level, not to mention the political censorship that we got from the national level up to the local level, that avoid us from making the right decisions for the right reasons instead of political battles that means nothing to people.
Claudia, I'm going to have to jump in now because that is a very powerful moment on which to end. Nicolas doesn't even have time to say anything other than yes. We'll be doing that because the clock's ticking down here.
Time's up.
So I have to end. I have 2 minutes, and I fear what will happen when the time runs out. I have to end by saying a massive thank you to all of you. What a brilliant panel. What an amazing amount of energy. Be brave, be ambitious. The resources are there. We heard also from the EIB earlier that people are turning to walking and cycling, understanding its potential, I think, as a part of equity in our cities, but also, of course, as its contribution on carbon and on the challenge we face on sustainable mobility. I would encourage everyone here to sign the letter which the Partnership for Active Travel and Health are circulating, which is making all of these claims and points. I think we might need to add a sentence to say the World Bank is fully behind us and get that letter in. So please sign, please join the movement the PATH is convening because it is indeed a very powerful one, which I think lies at the centre of our future for sustainable mobility. So thank you all for coming. Thank you to our panel. And I'll take the panelists.
Thank you. This is the path. This is the path, so never surrender.
Yeah, never surrender. Never surrender. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.